welcome to episode 9 of the Rivals in Law podcast. We're really excited today because we are going to be breaking down the NFL draft that happened only a couple days ago, this past Thursday. And before we get into it, I'm your co-host, Daniel Ellender.
Sam Abrams.
And before we get into it, I just want to give a shout out to our social media links. We're trying to grow those, so you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube at Rivals in Law.
And Facebook.
We're giving a lot of updates, breaking news, any trades in the NFL for college, any transfer portal news. So we're getting more on top of it. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. We just want to lead with that if you're interested in getting more connected with what we're doing. But today, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the draft, we want to give a shout out to all of those who came for the live draft. If you want to tell us a little bit who came over and what we did.
So we had some good friends that are listeners of the podcast, and they give us some really good feedback for the podcast. Cody Williamson, Caden, and Trevor also came, and look, we really appreciate them coming. I thought it was a great time.
I had a blast, man.
Yeah, it was
cool
a blast.
Just to hang out, to talk football, and I know we're not in football season right now, but it gave me that tease, get me ready for it.
Right, it was cool. It was cool to see the different perspectives of what people thought was happening as the draft was going through.
We had Saints fans, we had Packers, Lions.
Yeah.
So we're all in there together.
We had a Cincinnati Bengals fan. Michael Powell came as well, and so we had a good group of guys. We were trying to kind of figure it out. It wasn't always the smoothest thing. Instagram Live gave us some issues, but we got through it, and it was a good night.
It was awesome. And so as we did that, we want to have more kind of live things like that maybe in the future, maybe host some game days and all of that, which is fun. But before we go into our reaction to the draft, there's a little transfer portal news on the Bama front if you want to give it to us real quick, Sam.
Yeah, so last week, it was actually the day of the draft, I believe. Tyler Buckner from Notre Dame transferred to Alabama. He came for a visit, and the next day he committed to Alabama. Quarterback played underneath the now offensive coordinator for Alabama that was the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Look, this doesn't mean a ton, mainly because the transfer portal closed today, and as of the recording of this podcast, there were no quarterbacks that transferred out of the University of Alabama. So that tells me one thing. The competition is still very much real. He didn't just come to start, but he came to try to earn a spot. A young guy, he was a former 4-star prospect, and so we'll see. Didn't have a ton of playing time at Notre Dame, but Notre Dame, when they recruited him, believed he could play, and so we'll see how that goes. But let's get into the draft.
Let's do it. So NFL draft reaction.
Yeah,
we're only a couple days removed. I mean, honestly, it finished up yesterday. So we want to kind of do a kind of breakdown, like who had the best draft, what team, who had the worst, how did even from the college perspective, who got drafted from Bama, from LSU,
right.
And then we'll do a more deep dive on the Saints Packers analysis.
And what we're really wanting to focus on, just because of time and just how much information could be given out of this, we really want the information to be good. We want the breakdowns to be thorough. So we're going to focus on just the top 4 picks from each team that we think had the best draft, as well as the top 2 or 3 picks from teams that we thought had the worst draft. And then we'll get into the Packers. Same thing. Or the Packers and the Saints. We'll break down what we thought about their the best picks that they had. Kind of a breakdown of each one of those players, as well as maybe what they need going into preseason and going into rookie minicamp and things of that nature. And so, Daniel, how about you go first? Give me who you thought had the best draft.
All right, what team had the best draft? There's a lot of good picks. Again, it was fun to watch it in person, and so I'm just going to cut to the chase.
Let me say this. So when we talked about it really quick, we decided we were not going to now, I don't think the Packers had the best draft, and I don't think that Daniel thinks the Saints had the best draft. I also don't think either team we thought had the worst draft. But we chose, hey, let's leave our teams out of this regardless of our thoughts, and let's pick who we thought which other teams had the best or worst draft. Go ahead, Daniel.
All right, so my pick for the team that came out on top from this 2023 draft is the Philadelphia Eagles.
You mean the Philadelphia Bulldogs?
Yes. These Eagles swooped in, coming after some prey, and just scooped up some mice that were just out there on the table, man. So we look at the first pick. We're watching the draft, and all of us thought this guy was going to go earlier, going to go sooner. He kept falling, kept dropping, and the Eagles come up and swoop up Jalen Carter at number 9 overall. And so I think this was not only the best value pick, but honestly one of the best quality picks in the draft. This guy, Jalen Carter from Georgia, defensive tackle, he was valued 1 or 2 overall on a lot of big boards.
He fell.
And I think we know why he fell, because there was some character issues off the field. There was the wreck, things like that. But Jalen Carter fell, and the Eagles actually started at pick number 10. They traded with the Bears at number 9 for one spot. All they lost was a 4th rounder in 2024.
Right.
I think that's amazing to get Jalen Carter.
To get Jalen Carter, to get what could be the number 1 or 2 best prospect in this draft. I think that's a huge pick, especially considering the camaraderie and the chemistry that they're going to have because of how many of his teammates.
Exactly. And I think that was the reason there was a lot of off-the-field things. But I think with the Eagles already having so many Georgia players, they know Jalen. They're going to get him in line right when he steps out. And so as we talk about that SEC overhaul, they came in and took Nolan Smith, his teammate, at number 30 overall.
Right.
Outside linebacker, quick guy. Again, this guy was top 10, top 15 on a lot of big boards of overall prospect. He fell all the way to 30. Honestly, a guy who I was looking for the Saints to take 1 pick earlier. They passed on Nolan Smith. The Eagles took him. Again, swooped up, got this guy. Again, you pair these 2 guys, it is going to be scary with knowing who they got last year. I mean, they got, why am I blanking on his name? Jordan Davis, defensive tackle last year, one of the top 5 picks. You go back, Nakobe Dean. They've got 4 guys from what was considered one of the best college football defensive teams ever on that 2021 team.
Right.
And so they keep stacking it. As we go to 3 picks, they also picked up another SEC guy, Tyler Steen, who you know from Alabama.
Right.
6'6", 320 tackle, who they say can move to guard. He protected Bryce Young, the overall pick. So just SEC dominance overhaul on the beginning of this draft for the Eagles.
Right, absolutely.
And I want to give a point on that is why I think they're going this route. They're going to the SEC. Some of these best teams, best players.
Right.
We flash back to 2019. I'm gonna put us through it. They're going through the first round. They needed a receiver.
Right.
They select, I think it was pick 23, 24. They select Jalen Reagor
as
their wide receiver. They passed on the man that we all know very well, Justin Jefferson.
Right.
Next pick goes to the Vikings. And I think they're feeling a little bit of this buyer's remorse.
Right.
They try to hit a diamond in the rough with Jalen Reagor, and they didn't go for one of this top SEC in the town and Justin Jefferson. So now they're going back to the well. And since then, they have been dipping into that Georgia, Alabama, LSU, all these big SEC teams, big players. They're not overthinking it. What are some of the best teams that are putting out some of the best players? Let's just go ahead and grab them. So I love their picks. Great value, great quality.
Yeah, I think the Eagles had an incredible draft. When you look at it, so real quick, let me just give a shout out to my Bama boy, Tyler Steen. So he started off at Vanderbilt, and this is pretty cool. So Tyler Steen started off at Vanderbilt. We know him as now our top, around 3 pick offensive tackle going to the NFL. He started off as a defensive lineman for Vanderbilt.
Wow.
And his dad actually played at LSU.
Okay.
And so he went to Alabama, did really, really good at Alabama, guarding for a quarterback like Bryce Young, who doesn't run as much as Jalen Hurts, but a super improvising quarterback, kind of backyard, runs around a lot in the backfield. You got to keep him upright for a long time because a lot of the time Bryce had to make something happen. And so I think he's a guy that can produce a lot of good, could be a good backup for the Eagles and eventually even maybe turn into a starter. Landon Dickerson, very similar to that. I do want to say one more thing about the Eagles, who are now a all-SEC team practically. They also chose in the 4th round with the 105 pick, they chose Keely Ringo, who is a cornerback out of Georgia.
Gosh,
so they just kept it going.
Crazy. They kept moving, kept going. It's going to be exciting to see them play as they round out their team even more.
Right. And look, Keely Ringo, he's a guy that I think could end up transitioning into safety and being better than his projections were because he's a 6'2", 207-pound, really athletic cornerback who could also play safety. And so we'll see. We'll see how that goes.
Let's go. So now we're gonna flip the screen.
Yeah.
Who is the best team that came out of the draft for you, Mr. Sam Abrams?
Okay, well, look, I'm going to go to the hometown sweetheart, the Cincinnati Bengals.
Ooh, hot take.
And I say hometown sweetheart because we know Joe Burrow is everyone's favorite here in Baton Rouge. And I think they did a great job considering that offense and how good that offense is. You know, they have Joe Mixon, and could have they used depth behind Joe Mixon? Sure, but I don't think this running back draft was as deep as previous running back drafts. So I think with what they did, I think they did really good. So first, they chose Myles Murphy. And Daniel, how does that feel?
Yeah, this was a guy, I was sitting there, the Saints were getting close, the Bengals were on the clock, we were after, and I was saying, okay, we're going to take Myles Murphy right here.
Right.
DN, big guy. I was kind of expecting it, that he had already fallen that much. I was like, okay, let's take him. Of course, Bengals right before stumped me on the spot. They took Myles Murphy. So, yeah, they picked him right out of my hands.
Yeah, Myles Murphy came in ranked as the 3rd overall edge rusher in most people's draft boards. And so, really good edge rusher, really good athleticism. He's a 4.5 kind of guy, strong guy. Look, if you look at his production that he had his freshman year, and if that would have trajected as far as productivity, we might be talking about a top 5 pick. And so he's a guy that I think, Rashawn Gary for the Packers that came out of Michigan, similar mold.
Yep.
He's a guy that is really athletic, maybe didn't have the productivity he needed in college, but measurables and talent say that, hey, this can be a top guy at a premium position. You go on, and they chose DJ Turner, Michigan, or cornerback out of Michigan in round 2. And he was the number 8 overall cornerback. Look, this guy, Daniel, let me get your reaction real quick. His 40, 4.26.
Woo-wee.
Burning. He can flat out fly.
Cooking on a skillet, baby.
Yeah,
Come on.
he's quick. He got picked on a little bit while he was at Michigan, and he still needs to develop some. But for a team in the second round, you're looking at, hey, what can we do with a guy that can project based on his athleticism and his measurables? So I think he's a guy that can do pretty good. I think he's going to continue to develop into a cornerback that can be pretty good for Cincinnati, as well as he's a special teams. He could be a special teams guy with a 4.26 speed. The options are endless. And then with in round 3, they picked one of my guys, Jordan Battle out of Alabama, safety. So he was ranked as the number 4 safety on a lot of people's big boards. Look, they lost Von Bell in free agency. So he can be a long-term replacement for Von Bell. He's a guy that he's a baller. Look, he's not one of those guys that flashed off the charts in a lot of measurables, though he did test pretty well. He's one of those guys that the eye test, though, says everything it needs to say. He's a guy that's always around the football, very smart, very high football IQ, and as we know, he comes from a program that develops a lot of talented football players, and so we'll see how that does. But that's my thought as far as the best picks. I think when you're looking at it, I think Cincinnati did a really good job with where they were picking, making the most of it.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, we picked the Eagles and the Bengals, having some best picks. Now we flipped the side to the worst draft. Which team had the worst draft? And I took the first pick on the best, so we're going to give you the floor for the worst draft. Who was that team?
Now, let me preface this with saying, Trevor, I love you. I think the Lions had the worst draft. Now, and I'll say this. Let me say this. Not that I don't think Jack Campbell or Jahmyr Gibbs will end up being really good players. I think Jahmyr Gibbs has the potential to be one of the most productive rookies on the offensive side of the ball. He did really good as far as, look, everything he can do, he does it quick, fast, and in a hurry. Backward, forward, left, right, no matter what direction he's going, he's quick. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. Look, he's a good overall running back. Look, he's 5'9", 200 pounds. He puts on a little bit of muscle on that frame. You're looking at a really scary guy running the ball. But overall, in a draft where running backs were not very, you weren't drafting Leonard Fournette or Derrick Henrys or guys that really were super accomplished in the NFL. Even I can't remember the guy's name from Texas that Atlanta took. Bijan Robinson.
He went to 8, which is kind of crazy.
Which is really high.
That was a reach as well.
That was a reach as well. And so, with that being said, I just think they reached for him. I think they could have got him later in the draft. Like, they could have got him where they took the next guy, Jack Campbell, who, again, was another reach. Now, mind you, Dan Campbell, the head coach for the Lions, he really likes his guys. I can't fault him for that. Look, if I'm a coach, what I'm saying is, hey, with these players, I can be successful, which it's my job to be successful. So reach or no reach, I'm sure Dan Campbell's thinking, hey man, I get paid, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to be a coach. Let me be a coach. But I think they were both reaches. Again, it's not so much that I think those players are going to be bad players in the NFL, but rather I don't think that they were players. They weren't premium position players that you should be getting at a top 20 pick, which both of those guys were. And so, like I said, love the picks, don't love the position, or love the players, don't love the positions of the picks or the ranking of the pick or whatever. Look, a little bit about that Jack Campbell fella. So middle linebacker, he was one of the top-rated middle linebacker on most boards. And so it's not that he wasn't a good pick. One thing that's going to hurt him that he has to learn is he needs to attack a little bit more downhill. And so if you look at the tape, if you look at the kind of the highlights, a lot of his highlights were made him waiting back, which might not be terrible in the NFL, but you got to remember in the NFL, you have the best offensive lineman in the world flying at you, ready to put you on your back. Waiting back for those guys to come, for you to try to make a move might not be the best thing. So we'll see. And then also, NFL running backs are bigger and stronger. I was actually listening to a podcast that Derrick Henry was on where he was saying, and I remember Leonard Fournette famously came out and said, the NFL is not much more competitive to him than college football. Sure. Derrick Henry said the exact opposite. He said, are you kidding me? The difference in the level of competition is day and night. People are bigger, stronger, faster. They expect a greater level of excellence, which, this is a side note, I think might be one of the reasons that Leonard Fournette accomplished what he's accomplished and Derrick Henry has accomplished what he's accomplished. I think Derrick Henry just took it more seriously at first, which Leonard Fournette I think is starting to take it more seriously, which is why you see him his trajectory being upward. And so, look, again, both picks, I think, they're Lions type of picks. They're guys that I think could work really well with that Lions offense, with that Lions defense, that mentality, the physicality that they have going on there. But I think they were reaches, and because of that, I think that the Lions, at least for their first two picks, had the worst draft.
Yeah, just my comments on that. That was definitely a choice for me up there too with the Lions. Again, we love you, Trevor, and I love the Lions. Again, good picks, good players. I think they could have got Jahmyr Gibbs. They had a pick at 12, 18, and 30-something. I think they could have got Jahmyr at 18, maybe even later than that. They could have got the other guy at their later pick. So they could have got a nice pick at that 12. But again, you'll see what shakes out. And they ended up, we see now that they traded away DeAndre Swift. At first, it was like, okay, you got 3 running backs. Why would you take Jahmyr that early? They've traded away DeAndre Swift, so
we'll got
see what
peanuts
happens.
For.
Yeah,
I mean that was you're giving away in theory, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be at least at first a featured receiving running back, right? So you gave away one of the best receiving running backs in DeAndre Swift for some late round picks. Not much, and I get it. He might have not wanted to re-sign. The writing might have been on the wall. All that. But again, I think when you consider that, they gave away DeAndre Swift for even less whenever they took Gibbs at such a high pick.
Yeah, and that was, again, another Georgia guy going to the Eagles. So DeAndre Swift is now with the Eagles, which is another Georgia guy to add to the list. But yeah, so we'll flip side. So you took the Lions. I'm going to take a team that is kind of tied close to Sam now. I'm going to go with the New York Jets.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a hot take, but I think mainly I'm talking about their first pick. So they traded with the Aaron Rodgers trade. They were at 13. They moved back to 15. And at 15, they took Iowa State edge Will McDonald. And so, again, this is a good player. And this is a guy who, after I saw some of the tape that they were putting on the draft stuff, like he's a good guy. But, again, he was projected more of a late first-round guy. And I thought, again, this was a reach right here. And the Jets, I think they have one of the best defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, they do.
I thought right there they would take a big dynamic piece, either a Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Who was still on the board.
Still on the board. And Jackson Smith fell to, I think, 19 or 20 to the Seahawks. And so I thought that was way more of a logical choice for the Jets. You just got Rodgers. Build on top of that. Give him an exciting piece. But they take this guy at DN, at edge. So, yeah, it was just I thought it was a little bit of a reach for all that was happening with them, with Rodgers and everything. And so, yeah, I thought they could have taken a receiver there. And then for their second pick, they take a center, Joe Tippmann, at 43. And so, again, I understand protection, but ended up with this piece. I looked up into it. They had just re-signed their center.
Yeah, on a cheap one-year deal.
And so, again, I think this pick was for the long term, but they had already established their starter. So I'm like, I thought they could have taken a swing on a, again, dynamic offensive piece, maybe another piece. So I just thought they didn't start off the draft as hot as I'd like them to see. So that was my worst team.
I'll say this. Let me add on to the Jets because I love piling it on the Jets right now.
Stick it to the man.
Yeah, so look, this was kind of ironic. You look at what the Jets did as far as they drafted a heavy defense, and so you look at they took or heavy defense and a couple offensive lines. So they drafted an edge and then a center, then a tackle. They drafted a running back in the 5th round. They drafted another linebacker in the 6th round. They actually drafted your boy, Jarek Bernard Converse.
Yes, well, I want to make a comment on that.
Okay.
Let's save that
We'll
for
save
LSU
that.
talk.
So they drafted that in the 6th round. They drafted him in the 6th round, and then got a tight end in the 7th round. Rodgers continues not getting any help. And I think that's just one of the things that when you're the greatest, or one of the greatest, when your guy is considered to be the top of the pack, that's always going to happen. You're never going to get the help that you think you need because they assume that you're going to make it happen.
They've got good pieces, and I'll say maybe they're banking on that. But I thought they could have, get a younger guy because they have Garrett Wilson, they have I guess Alan Lazard now, they have Breece Hall coming back. But yeah, again, I thought they could have got a more dynamic playmaker earlier than some of those later picks.
Well, and then you look at it. Dalton Kincaid was available.
Yes.
So
Jackson Smith and Jigba was available. Zay Flowers.
And even if you're going to say at wide receiver, right? They have Garrett Wilson. They have Corey Davis. They have Alan Lazard. They signed Mecole Hardman in the free agency.
They got some players.
But you look at tight end. They have C.J. Uzomah and Tyler Conklin. But man, and they drafted Zach Kuntz in the 7th round, which I know nothing about him. But you're like, man, if you're Rodgers, you got to be thinking, why didn't you get me another player? And so we'll see. Again, I don't think that was the best draft they could have had. I mean, they have at defensive end, they have Carl Lawson, they have John Franklin Myers at the other side, and they have Jermaine Johnson on the other side, who's second string and he was a top, I believe, a top 15 draft pick. And then you have at defensive tackle, you have Quentin Jefferson, and then you have Quentin Williams at the right defensive tackle. You just got so much defense. I love it. I love seeing it.
Yeah.
Because Green Bay, and we'll never mind. We'll get to it.
We'll get to it. So before we segment off into the Saints and Packers, we want to give just a little spotlight on our college teams.
Yeah.
Who got drafted? What happened?
Your list is a little bit shorter. Maybe I'll let you go first.
Okay, yeah. We'll give it to me first. Hey, we'll just wait. We'll wait for next year.
Yeah.
That's what we'll always say. But yeah, we had didn't have as strong as the draft class as usual. But we had some solid guys who went on the board, a lot of them later than Sam's guys that we're about to talk about. I thought Bama had one of the best teams out the draft. But with the LSU Tigers, we had 6 players drafted. I'm going to kind of go down the list real quick. So the one guy who was considered possibly a first-rounder, B.J. Ojulari, ended up going earlier second to the Cardinals, and I thought that was a great value pick for the Cardinals right
Agreed.
there.
I think he's going to be a great NFL player.
Yeah, I thought he could. The Saints could have even taken him where they were at if they were looking for a DN. So Ojulari goes 41. We had Anthony Bradford, 4th round, pick 108 to the Seahawks. So this is a offensive guard. Jay Ward, we had a safety, go 4th round to the Vikings. We had Jaquelin Roy go 5th round to the Vikings. They were only like 7 picks apart, so it's cool to see. Vikings have kind of been a pipeline for LSU. You got Justin Jefferson, sure. These 2 guys, Danielle Hunter. A lot of guys are kind of going that way, which is cool. Patrick Peterson, So now our boy Kayshon Boutte
Dropped
to 6th round pick, 187 to the Patriots. I just want to give just a little segment right here. I mean, it's a guy that, a couple years ago they were saying this could be top 15, top 10 pick receiver going into the draft. And dude just fell. I don't know if it got to his head. I mean, he had like a little injury as well. Just a lot has happened, but we'll see. I mean, he's a great talent. I think he kind of fell off in the combine. We'll see what he does with the Patriots. If he gets
I think
any
the Patriots
playing
can
time.
offer him some much-needed structure.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a great value.
Yeah.
Getting him in the 6th round, I mean, it's kind of like one of those picks where it's like, okay, he had the potential. We'll see what happens. And then they close it out with Jarek Bernard-Converse. Again, a guy that I touched on in the highlight who improved his draft stock. He wasn't even projected to get drafted. He got drafted in the 6th round, pick 204 to the Jets, which is kind of exciting for him because he's going to be opposite, or maybe behind Sauce Gardner.
Which I think is going to be great because he's going to learn from a really good defensive coach.
Yes.
I think he's one of those guys that I think he could be a contributor in some way, whether it's a depth player on defense or special teams, but he can contribute, which is going to lead to more time for him to showcase his talents.
I don't know, that'd be amazing to see him gets a starting spot next to Sauce. I mean, it'd be really cool, but yeah, so those are the 6 guys. Again, highlight, we talked about him a lot, B.J. Ojulari. Hope he does well at the Cardinals. But I'm glad some of these guys, and there was a handful of free agent signings after.
Look, and I hope Kayshon does get his feet underneath him and succeeds. I mean, he was a fun player to watch when he was at LSU. He was a guy that obviously has an immense amount of talent. So
had a flash in the Georgia game, SEC championship.
Right. So I think he's one of those guys that I think he needs some structure, and I think he can benefit.
Right. All right, so I'll give you the floor. For Alabama, but just let me hear it. Just go ahead. What did Bama do?
So Alabama. Look, when you look at both our teams, Alabama and LSU, Alabama did have 10 players drafted in this year's draft, but both teams probably put out some of their weaker classes. Speaking of that, real quick, Patrick Peterson's now on the Steelers. Remember that?
Okay, that's true. I forgot about that.
So he's, which I'm super excited because the Steelers can definitely use him, and I think he's one of those guys that as long as he keeps playing, he'll play at a really high level.
It's crazy.
So they had 10 players drafted. Just a little side note: Alabama has at least one first-round pick in the last 15 straight drafts, and that surpasses Miami's record for consecutive drafts with first-rounders, which was 14. So that's just, I think that's pretty notable.
And their number one.
Yeah, first
ever.
overall,
So
and hopefully he does better than LSU's previous number one overall.
Gosh, Jamarcus?
And I think
Joe Burrow. Are you talking about which one? Are you talking
No,
about?
you're right. It was Joe. I forgot. I'm thinking back to Jamarcus.
Yeah, Jamarcus. Yeah.
Hopefully he does better than Joe Burrow. But Joe Burrow is on a tear to become. I think I think when it's said and done, he'll be one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks of all time. I really do. I think he's doing incredible. With that being said, Bryce Young. So best places to succeed. And I asked this question, and I was thinking about Alabama because we did have higher picks, and so you look at kind of where they're going, and I'll start off Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young has a opportunity to be really good. I think Frank Reich, as his head coach, you see he's had success with quarterbacks in the NFL, and I think he can do really well over there. They're obviously trying to surround him with talent, as well as I think he's a really good quarterback. I think he's one of those guys that has a special amount of talent around him to make things happen and kind of improvise, which I think you need to be able to do in today's NFL. Will Anderson is my second, which the Texans shocked the world by trading up. So they took C.J. Stroud and they were like, boom, we're back. We want Will Anderson. And
that was pretty wild.
Yeah, that was wild.
Pick, yeah.
Because the Texans are in rebuild mode. Yeah. And they're putting all their eggs in this basket. They're not waiting for next year's draft. They want to be competitive now.
Top offense and defense, we're going for it now.
Right now. Now their head coach, D'Amico Ryan, former Alabama player. He was actually the rookie defensive player of the year.
Wow.
Whenever he was in the league, defensive minded head coach. I really think he can help Will Anderson get the most. Now a lot of people made a big whoop of him not being as athletic as other guys like Von Miller and different guys like that. Von Miller was one of those athletic players to ever come through the combine.
Insane.
It's not a fair comparison. But I'll say this. Will Anderson, 2 years in a row in the SEC, was able to rack up double-digit sacks. And so I think he's a guy that can do a lot better than a lot of people are anticipating him to do. And I think D'Amico Ryan saw that and said, let's go get our guy. Number 3, Brian Branch. So Brian Branch, again.
Jameer Gibbs was
I think Brian Branch has a better chance to succeed.
Okay.
And this is why. So these are and I think Jahmyr Gibbs can succeed, but when I look at the projection for Brian Branch, he's going to play for a team in Detroit that had a okay defense last year, not a great defense. And so if he helps it improve, he's going to get a lot of benefit from that. He's going to get a lot of credit from that. And so I can see him doing that, as well as, look, it's kind of a match made in heaven. Brian Branch was kind of the heart of Alabama's defense, and he was super hard-nosed. He was an intense player, and now he's going to play for an intense, bite-your-kneecap coach like Dan Campbell. I'm kind of excited to see that. Now, again, Jahmyr Gibbs, I think he's going to do great, but I think Brian Branch has an opportunity to do even better.
Awesome. Well, cool. That's a little recap of little LSU Bama draftees, and I just want to give one little point. It's cool to see, again, this is just looking forward to college football. It's cool to see what Brian Kelly did with not as much talent to be able to produce a good team last year. So it makes me hopeful for what's to come.
For sure.
So,
look, I think LSU, when you look at their track record of hiring coaches, Nick Saban excluded, which anybody that hires Nick Saban is going to be a genius. But I think this is going to go down as one of their better hires. I think Brian Kelly is a good coach. I think he's going to continue to bring in good talent, and I think he's going to be able to do something with it.
Awesome. So now we're going to go to our two teams, the Saints and the Packers.
Yeah.
All right. So the Saints. So we're going to kind of go through and how did each team do. Mm-hmm. As we break it down for the Saints, I'll just kind of get into it if that works with you.
Yeah, for sure.
So the New Orleans Saints, we sat here during our live draft. We had a couple guys all rooting for them. As I look over it, I think it was honestly just a pretty average draft. I think there wasn't any big splash picks. Honestly, mostly what we expected.
Right.
And it's kind of I look back to our mock draft.
Right.
We look back.
You did a great job.
I didn't pick the exact players, but I hit the position needs of what they needed. There was only one slip up, which I'm going to touch on. I'm going to first go kind of recap of the picks. I'm going to give you my favorite pick, and then I'm going to give you the needs that we filled, and then some that are still open. Okay. And there's a spot that we didn't hit that I'm pretty surprised about. That's why I kind of say it was an average draft. But let's go through the picks. So recap of the picks. They had 7 picks. Some of those were through trades. We go down the list. So round 1, pick 29 overall. We took Brian, and I figured this out. It's not Breezy, it's Brian Brzee.
Right.
So Brian Brzee, D-tackle out of Clemson, number 1. Round 2, pick 40, Isaiah Foskey, D-end out of Notre Dame. Round 3, pick 71, we took running back out of TCU, Kendre Miller.
Right.
Round 4, pick 103, from the Bears, we took offensive guard Nick Saldiveri out of Old Dominion. Another pick in round 4, 127. So we actually traded up to get this from the Jaguars. Jake Haener, quarterback out of Fresno State. Round 5, 146, Jordan Howden, safety out of Minnesota. And then round 6, pick 195, A.T. Perry, wide receiver out of Wake Forest.
Right.
So as we look at all that, I'm gonna pull out my favorite pick. So again, there wasn't anything huge that jumped out, but I'm gonna go with just our first pick, Brian Brzee. So this is a guy who, again, I was sitting there hoping they'd get his teammate Myles Murphy, but I understand why they took this guy. So we talked about it leading up to the draft. What are big needs? And one of the biggest needs is the defensive line for the Saints. You had Onyemata, Tuttle, 2 defensive tackles, got traded away, free agency. We had Davenport, defensive end, traded away. We have Cam Jordan on his last contract. So I knew we had to get some of these D-lines, replenish it, and that's exactly what they did. So from my mock draft, I took a D-tackle, then a D-end, then a running back. That's exactly what they did on the draft night, which was cool to see. But as we go back to Brian, this is a guy who, as we look at his early career, this was the number 1 prospect out of high school. Number 1 prospect on the board, which is pretty wild. He was then a freshman All-American at Clemson his first year. And then we kind of go into some of the struggles. He ended up tearing his ACL sophomore year. Another side note, prayers with his family. His sister died of brain cancer. Yeah. And so there was a lot of things that happened his sophomore year. Was one of the best offensive linemen in the country, defensive tackles in the country. And then this kind of happened. He kind of came back on the horse junior year, and that's why we see him picked in the first round. Incredible talent. He had about, through his career, 26 games. He had 9 sacks. interception, forced fumble, safety. So I think that's my favorite pick. They got the guy. He's a guy who I think could instantly compete for a spot on that defensive line
for
at
sure.
the Saints. And I'm not going to go into depth, but Foskey was a DN they got from Notre Dame, and this is a guy, again, they took him because we're depleted that D-line. They went right back to the well. I was kind of hoping for some more electric picks right there at Foskey's spot. But again, they say he's a guy got raw talent. He had double-digit sacks his last 2 years, which was good. A guy who can get after the quarterback. And then they just took Kendre Miller, was a guy who big back, 5'11", 215, who's going to give some depth if Kamara misses time with Jamal Williams. So, again, I'll stick with Brian Brzee as my favorite pick. And then as I close it out with the Saints, again, we knew going in they needed to fill defensive line. And they did.
They did a great job at it, I think.
They did a great job. First 2 picks. Again, they took the D tackle, they took the DN. And so I think these are 2 guys that can instantly compete for spots.
Right.
I think it's still not going to be the strongest line. That's some rookies with what they have already.
Right.
Hopefully Cam Jordan can kind of coach them up, kind of getting into the
season. And there's no telling. Cam Jordan might come back next year.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. And he loves the Saints, so it'd be cool to see that happen. So they filled defensive line. Another one, question mark, was the running back.
Right.
What happens if Kamara misses time? 6 games the whole season. They signed Jamal Williams, which was great. They got rid of Mark Ingram. So this is a guy who could potentially step in. I didn't see a ton of his tape. I think he was hurt for the national championship. I can't remember.
He was hurt for the national championship, which might have been good for him because Georgia put a shellacking on TCU.
Probably helped his tape.
Right.
And then another guy I just want to touch on was like receiver. You have Michael Thomas, you have Chris Olave. But behind that, it's like Raheed Shaheed and Thomas has missed time. I thought there was a great value. I looked at PFF. A.T. Perry, their last pick, was a great value pick. They said it was a very great pick late in the draft. 6'4" receiver out of Wake Forest. Past 2 seasons, he had over 1,000 yards. So it was cool to see them take him. And this Jake Haener guy apparently was a beast at Fresno State.
Okay.
I didn't know much about him going in, but it's cool to see they have some depth there now behind Carr.
Okay.
They took a quarterback. But positions that they didn't hit, which I was preaching about before the start of the draft, was tight end.
Right.
And I think they pivoted, honestly, because going into the second round, Michael Mayer was on the board. What's his name? The Lions took him. The Vanderpoort guy.
Sam
Laporta. They kind of passed over some guys. Those 2 were taken by the time we hit our 40th pick. But there were still some other guys on the board who they passed on, and I guess they saw D-line as a bigger position of need. They have Juwan Johnson, and then they traded away Adam Troutman in the draft to the Broncos. And so it opened up that position even more.
Man. Yeah, that was super weird.
It was like already a position of concern. They traded away a guy, so it'll be interesting to see. Maybe they sign somebody. Maybe they just rock with, I guess, Juwan Johnson and Taysom Hill is who we got. Maybe waiting for next year. So that was a position where I'm kind of like concerned for the Saints. Overall, I think it was average draft. I wish they would have hit a tight end, but got some solid picks. We'll see how they turn out. So
the Packers, as far as how the draft went, I love the way the draft went. I think they did a good job. I think their first pick wasn't what I wanted.
The reaction was there was some mixed bag at live.
There was, and I'll get into that, but let me say this. It was really good to see the Packers draft based on need and not just based on best available, because they were able to go after some really needed positions. And so let me start off with Lucas Van Ness. And so edge out of Iowa, I really wasn't thrilled with this pick. Now, I could understand why they did this pick. So Lucas Van Ness, 6'5", 272 pounds. He's young. He's 21. Ran a 4.58 at that weight. Super athletic, super long. He's one of those guys. He's like a Rashawn Gary. I go back to that. Except he's more versatile. So Rashawn Gary plays primarily on the edge. Lucas Van Ness could line up all over that defensive line, and so I can see why they did it. I think it was one of those things I was telling you before the podcast. So Green Bay got that pick. Lucas Van Ness was linked to New England throughout the entire offseason. Just kind of one of those guys that would fit the Patriots mold, would kind of go, somebody that they really, really liked. And as soon as they picked him, The Patriots traded down.
Yeah, they were 14. So the Packers were what, pick 13 or 12?
Correct.
I think.
Let me see. I think they were
They were
13.
13, yeah. Patriots were right after them. Yeah, and they traded back.
Right, and so
They must have pivoted, right? They saw this.
yeah, the Packers were 13, and they traded back, and I think the Patriots did a great job trading back.
Yeah.
They got Christian Gonzalez, who I think is
That's
gonna be
another team who I
outstanding.
think got a
yeah,
great
they did a really good job at the draft. But overall, look, Lucas Van Ness, for Packers fans, I wouldn't be too upset about it, because if he pans out to be Rashawn Gary, we're going to be very happy, right? We have a really good guy, especially when you consider we have Kenny Clark, we have Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, who's getting older. We have guys that can really teach him and help him hone in. He was one of those guys that primarily bull rushed because of how big he was and how strong he was. I don't know if he'll get away with that in the NFL, but we'll see. I think he's one of those guys that's going to learn how to do, the other parts of the game. Parts of his game are going to improve. But my top two picks for Green Bay were actually tight ends. So Luke Musgrave.
That was interesting. They took two.
Yeah, so Luke Musgrave, when they took him, a lot of guys, measurable wise. So let me pull this up. Luke Musgrave is 6'6", 253 pounds. Really big guy. Played for Oregon State. Ran a 4.61. So he's one of those guys that could really play all over the place. He could be moved into the slot. He can attack the seam. A really big guy that I think can do really well. He can do all the things that Green Bay wanted Robert Tonyan to do, but was never able really to do, especially after that ACL injury. So we'll see. He's one of those guys that I think has more potential than some of the guys that were drafted ahead of him, even a Michael Mayer. And I think he's one of those guys that if he can stay healthy, can end up being a really good asset. And then my other guy, he's this guy, Tucker Kraft. So he came out of South Dakota State, playing the FCS. 6'5", 254 pounds, so a little bit smaller than Luke Musgrave, but he ran a 4.69. He's another guy that he can move, he can play all over the place, and it's just cool that if you look at the kind of reaction whenever he was drafted, it was a really emotional thing. He got drafted and he's going to play for the Green Bay Packers out of a small college. Got drafted, round 3. That's a really really high pick for someone out of a school as small as South Dakota State. Now South Dakota State is the premier college in the FCS, right? But nonetheless, it was a small school. And so both those picks I was really happy with. Luke Musgrave is more known to be a receiving tight end, where Kraft is more of a blocking tight end. But nonetheless, I think he's a guy that can be really really good in the NFL with some polishing. They both project to be average starters at the very least. And so
Wow.
I'm happy with those picks. And again, they dealt with tight end for a young quarterback like Jordan Love is a security blanket, and I'm really happy they got him 2 good security blankets. Green Bay did continue to draft, and so they let me just kind of start from the top. So they took Lucas Van Ness with the 13th overall pick. Then they took Luke Musgrave with the 42 pick. They took Jaden Reed, which I was kind of head scratching because I believe when they took Jaden Reed, Hillam, is that his name? The guy from the receiver from I can't remember his name. The receiver from Tennessee, Hyatt, yeah.
Tillman.
So he was still available, and Tillman was still available as well. And so I don't know
interesting.
why they took Jaden Reed here. I think it was a bit of a reach. He was projected to be in a lot of boards somewhere around the 122nd. They took him at 50. But look, Green Bay's done a really good job drafting receivers, so I'm not going to start doubting them now. And then they took Tucker Kraft, which I think again was one of those things that was really really good value pick. They took Colby Wooden out of Auburn, which another one that was good. Sean Clifford. I was not a fan of the Sean Clifford pick, even though he did okay at Penn State.
Quarterback.
He was quarterback from Penn State. I wasn't really a big fan of that. Not because it was a quarterback, because they need a backup. But more so because I believe Brian Gutekunst actually said, "Hey, there was a running quarterback. He was the last available guy, so we traded up to get him." I get it, but I'm not too happy with that pick. And then they went on to take. They took after Sean Clifford. They took. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce this. D. Wicks out of Virginia, wide receiver. He's another guy. I think it was kind of a reach, but he was a really quick guy. He ran. He's not a quick guy, but he's a tall guy. So he's one of those guys that can be a big play vertical threat. Kind of contested catches. again, at that point, you're looking for a guy that can kind of contribute to the depth chart. They took edge Carl Brooks out of Bowling Green next. Then they took Anders Carlson out of Auburn. Now,
Who is this?
let me take my kicker. Let me take my because they chose an Auburn guy before that, so I'm not. Colby Wooden's an edge out of Auburn. It's not so much that it was an Auburn guy; it was that Anders Carlson had a field goal percentage of 68.6 and 22, and over his career, so his career of kicks of at least 30 yards, he only hit 59.2%. So
what?
To replace I believe Mason Crosby was the top scorer in Packers history because of his consistency and how he can kick. To take him there, I don't like the pick. But again, we'll see. They took Lou Nichols out of Central Michigan, who was a halfback. Then they traded up to get him. I think he's one of those guys that can, if they're banking on his 2021 version, he ran for over 1,800 yards and 16 touchdowns. He's a compact guy, so he's kind of like an A.J. Dillon, 5'11", 222 pounds, big guy. Wow. So we'll see how he does. Again, Green Bay, that's another position where they've done really good just taking guys out of their pick, and this was all the way in the 7th round, the 242nd pick. They got the number 5 safety in the class. I love this pick. Wow. Anthony Johnson Jr. out of Iowa State. So he was one of those guys. He converted from cornerback to safety his senior season. He performed really well, and so people loved his versatility. Tested pretty good as well. PFF grades the pick as elite, and for you to get that grade all the way in the 7th round, that was really, really good. Wow. So I was really happy with that guy. With Adrian Amos leaving, I think he's got a chance to really get some good playing time and play well. And then Grant Dubose, this is how they rounded out 256 pick, which was a compensatory pick. They chose him. He was one of those guys that he was a slot receiver. He played for Charlotte. We'll see. I mean, he's one of those guys that's just going to be trying to stay on the roster that low. But overall, look, Green Bay did something they haven't done in years, which was draft offense heavy. So I love the draft. It was a fun draft to watch. Again, I don't think this was one of the best drafts. I think it was a weaker draft as far as overall talent is concerned.
I think compared to last year, I think quarterback was a lot more talented this year.
Sure.
But like you said, overall,
everything else I just think was just less talented. I think you look at the top 4 quarterbacks, I think Tennessee got a steal with Will Levis dropping that far.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. Will Levis was a guy projected, some say could have gone at 1, top 5 pick. He slipped all the way through the first round. We're all looking at each other like, okay, he might not get drafted in this first round. He was there. It was kind of one of those moments like, oh, man, you kind of hate it for him. But
Anthony Richardson went all the way at number 4 for the Colts.
Yeah, we can talk about a couple of these. Yeah, Will Levis fell to the Titans at like 33, 32, 33, which I think is a good spot for him. Behind Tannehill, we'll see what happens there.
Right.
It makes sense. But yeah, there was a couple picks there at the beginning.
The Seahawks had a really good draft. They got Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois, which was the number 1 overall cornerback on a lot of people's big boards. And then they got Jackson Smith and Njigba later, which I think was great.
I think they had a great draft.
They did.
Like you said. Some of these teams, it'll be interesting to see, like, out of this first round, you kind of think about, who out of this could be the defensive rookie of the year, the offensive rookie of the year. Like, I'm interested to see how Bijan does. With the Atlanta reach on him at pick 8, took Bijan Robinson. They've already got Cordell Patterson. I think they already talked about moving him. So there were some interesting picks that it'll be interesting to see, like, what happens.
Yeah, I think Washington, they went safe. They went Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State, which he was the number 5 cornerback. I think it was a little bit of a reach there. I think Christian Gonzalez, which, man, the Patriots, I don't know how they do it every year, but I think when they saw that Emmanuel Forbes went to Washington and they saw Christian Gonzalez was still available, they traded up to get him right away because he was the number 2 overall cornerback. But Emmanuel Forbes, again, he was one of those guys that he had 14 interceptions when he was at Mississippi State, so he had some productivity. I think he can be a good contributor to that Washington defense, which is already pretty good.
Right. One note that I want to touch on, I don't know if we mentioned this. I think it happened midweek, so we hadn't said it, but Lamar Jackson, we shared this thing on the story. He signed a 5-year deal. It's like $185 million guaranteed. Just a huge contract. So that kind of influenced, I think, the draft a little bit. He signed.
sure.
Odell Beckham's there. Then they draft in the first round Zay Flowers. So a speedy guy. They just say he's like super shifty. So to complement him with Lamar Jackson, with an Odell Beckham, with a Mark Andrews, it's kind of shaping out.
When we were actually watching the draft, it was funny. Cody made a comment. I believe it was Cody. He said, did they just draft Hollywood Brown again? Because Zay Flowers looks a lot like Hollywood Brown, and he's that kind of receiver. And so I think that was good. Look, here's my sneaky pick for offensive rookie of the year.
Let's give a quick hot take. Yeah.
I think Jordan Addison.
Ooh.
I think he's playing opposite of Justin Jefferson, where they're
so
going
they
to put
took
a lot
him
of
with the
attention.
Vikings. Yeah, that was interesting.
They chose him with pick 23. He's a guy that he was I can't even say it.
Blitnikoff.
Thank you. Award winner when he was at Pittsburgh. He went to USC. He didn't do as well, but he had a good season when he was at USC. I think they did a good job picking him. I think he's going to be able to go up against, not the number one cornerback several times in a game, and so he's going to be able to benefit off that. Who's your choice?
Yeah, offensive rookie. I'm looking at here right now. I think it's going to be a quarterback. So I think it's going to be one of those guys.
Okay,
I'm gonna give it to Bryce Young. I'm gonna go with your boy.
Okay.
It's a guy who I picked in the mock draft 1 overall. I think he's immediately stepping in there and is gonna put himself out there. So I think Bryce Young will take the offensive rookie of the year.
I love that pick, obviously.
Yeah.
I think I wasn't even thinking quarterback, so I agree. I think that could be that's obviously very possible. Defensive rookie of the year. Who you got?
Gosh, okay. I'm gonna kind of scroll through. I'm looking real quick. Let's see. We've got some cornerbacks. We got some DNs.
I got my pick.
Okay, you go ahead.
I think Will Anderson.
Okay.
I think he's going to come. I think he's going to produce. I think he's going to hit 10 plus sacks.
Wow.
I really think he's going to show that he's a really hard worker, man. I think he's going to end up being really good in the NFL. And I think he's going to end up getting, at least he's going to be top 3 somewhere in there.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go with an edge as well. I'm gonna go Tyree Wilson out of the Oakland Raiders. So I think this is a guy, again, I think he's got a lot of raw talent, but I think it's a guy who's going to be opposite of Max Crosby. So I'm thinking Max Crosby's going to put a lot of pressure. Maybe Tyree Wilson steps in. And if not that, my sneaky second pick is cornerback opposite of Tariq Woolen at the Seahawks, Devin Witherspoon.
Okay.
So I think he's a cornerback that Tariq Woolen was a rookie last year, was one of the best performing rookies, so he's already going to be drawing some of those high receivers. They're probably going to try to pick on Witherspoon some. He could probably take advantage of it.
So you know who I think can be a sneaky pick, and I'll close off with this.
Okay.
I think somebody that can be really good in the NFL, which, watch out fantasy, I think this is a guy that you're going to want to pick up. I think Dalton Kincaid. He goes to Buffalo. Hunter Knox has had issues staying healthy. Dawson Knox, sorry. Has had issues staying healthy. You see that, what's his name? Diggs. Stephon Diggs isn't really happy over there right now. And so no telling what's going to happen with that. But I think Dalton Kincaid in that offense can really be one of those guys that can be a focal point of the offense.
Love it. All right, so this kind of wraps up our podcast. I want any listeners right now listening to this, you probably had your own opinions on this draft, so please reach out to us. Go on Instagram, send us a DM at Rivals-in-Law. And another thing we haven't mentioned yet, leave us a review. If you're listening on Spotify, that helps us spread the word. It gets it out. It pumps it out to new people. So
it lets us know what we could work on.
Yeah, you can leave us a review. 5-star review always helps. And like I said, once we get on Apple Podcasts, which we're hoping to do this week,
right,
you can actually leave word reviews. But on Spotify, you can click 5-star, whatever you think. And then we're also going to be up on YouTube as well. So leave comments below. What are some picks that you liked? What are some teams that you thought outperformed, teams that didn't do as well? We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, with that being said, thanks for listening to the Rivals-in-Law podcast. Tune in next time for some more.
Thank you.